This conference will now be recorded.
That sounds official. And we have two agenda items today. Again, I want to thank everyone for tuning into our virtual lunch, where we meet on the second Tuesday of every month. So the next lunch, I think, will be on the 9th of March. And we have two speakers on the agenda for today. We've got Victoria Virasingh, who is a announced candidate for the 8th District Democratic Congressional nomination. And we also have the Arlingtonians for Public Education, which will have a much longer part of our presentation. So Victoria has served in various capacities with ACDC, and at last Tuesday's meeting, she announced her candidacy. I'm sure that she has her presentation well rehearsed, so I won't steal her thunder, and instead I'll give you Victoria. Let's give her a warm Arlington Senior Democrats welcome. Victoria, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you so much, Bob, for inviting me here to Senior Lunch. It's so wonderful to share this lunch hour with all of you. My name is Victoria Virasingh. I'm born and raised here in Arlington. My parents are both immigrants. My mom is from Ecuador in South America, and my father is the son of Punjabi Sikh refugees born in Bangkok, Thailand. They made their way here to Arlington. They met in Ballston before Ballston was cool and trendy and expensive like it is today. They met in an apartment on Monroe and Wilson Boulevard. They got married at Arlington Courthouse, and I was born in Arlington Hospital, now the Virginia Hospital Center. And our story is a story that so many immigrant families experience here in Virginia's 8th. My parents worked minimum wage jobs. My dad was in and out of work. At times, we were just surviving on my mom's minimum wage job, which at the time was $5.50 an hour plus tips. And I mention this because I think that experience of knowing what it's like to have a minimum wage job, knowing what it's like to have, $100 have a last for a family of 3 for 2 weeks. It's those experiences that I think are so important to have at the decision-making table, because I believe it strengthens the perspectives of our legislators. I believe it adds color to legislative priorities and helps us craft policies that truly lift all communities up together. I'm a proud Arlingtonian. I'm a proud resident of Virginia's 8th District. And the motivation to run in this race is to provide a voice for communities that have often been overlooked and underrepresented in our electoral political process. I speak with voters and communities every day about their issues and their concerns. And there's so many people who tell me that they want to participate in our electoral process. They are excited about politics. They just don't know where to go. They don't know where to start. That is what this campaign is doing. This campaign is creating bridges between our lovely community and the ACDCs and the Alexandria Democrats and the Fairfax Local Democratic Committee, Mount Vernon and Falls Church, and creating bridges with communities that want to come and be part of our political system. It is democracy at work. It is talking about kitchen table issues like jobs, the economy, housing, healthcare, education. It's providing a voice and an opportunity for so many, to come here. I am a proud Democrat. A lot of my professional experiences span government. I worked on the Hill. I have worked in the nonprofit sector. I have worked in the private sector. I believe these experiences have shaped my perspective today. I believe these experiences would give me a huge foundation on which I could legislate on at the federal level to create policies that help us build an economy for the future. Communities are being brought along, and we're continuing to be, in my opinion, the best congressional district in this great country. So that's it. That's my speech, and I'd love the opportunity to hear from you all and about your priorities and any questions that you may have for me or how we are operating this campaign.
Okay, I always get the prerogative of asking the first question, and when we hear from a lot of different candidates for a lot of different offices, two things that come up. One is economic development, and I guess also in the congressional context, the word earmarks always comes up also. Jim Moran was famous for a lot of Arlington-based earmarks. What are your views on earmarks, and what do you think you can do to help with economic development in Northern Virginia or nationally? Thank you.
Yes, well, thank you, Bob, for that question. I think one of our pillars on the campaign is new leadership for the new economy. I believe that economic development, I had a meeting this morning. I'm an appointed member of the Arlington Economic Development Commission. And we had a phenomenal meeting this morning on our AED, Arlington Economic Development, and all the things that we are doing here in Arlington to support small business growth, to encourage jobs for a lot of different industries and people, and how we can continue building on creating more opportunities within the tech industry here. What I believe is true, and we are an example of that, how and where we work has changed. It has changed in a lot of ways that I believe will continue to exist even post when we finally finish this pandemic or go into this new normal. I think that we need to redefine what success looks like post K-12. Sometimes it looks like a 4-year college degree. Sometimes it looks like a trade school opportunity. Sometimes it looks like an apprenticeship program. How can we use federal funding to help support a lot of the state and local initiatives that we have in Virginia's APE to help encourage this redefinition of what success looks like? As we all know, technology is playing an increasingly important role in the skills that we're developing. And every single job and role that I talk to, there's some element of digital training. Therefore, I think that what we need to do is prepare our students, prepare our workers to meet the demands of this job. I would love to see, companies that are coming in, especially tech companies are coming in. I'd love to make sure those jobs are going to people in our district. I want to make sure that we have a workforce that is prepared and ready to do that. So that brings to the question of earmarks. Earmarks are a way that our federal government and representatives can ensure that funding is coming directly to our district. Given that we have one of the largest economies in the Commonwealth, especially in the DMV area, I believe that earmarks are one way that we can support a lot of our state and local initiatives to help increase our economic reach and sustain economic growth into the future.
Thank you for that answer. Does someone else have a question? Anybody else? Raise your hand. Oh yes, Todd, go ahead and ask a question, and then Mary after Todd. Todd, you're first.
I'm not part of senior Dems, but I thought
that's okay. We're gonna check your age.
So Victoria, if you were to say, like, if you were to get into Congress, what types of committees would you want to serve on? What do you really consider your policy sweet spots?
So, one of my backgrounds is in the technology industry, and I so fundamentally believe in protecting our data privacy and also ensuring that we have competition in the market. So first thing I learned, Economics 101, my freshman year of college, competition in the market is good. I'm worried because I see less and less competition in the market, especially not just in the technology space, but in a lot of different parts of our economy. Data privacy is a huge one. I think there's a lot of state bills. California just passed one. There's a really good one up in the in the Northeast. Those are two things that would have bipartisan support and are things that I believe we are at the forefront of, and we so urgently, have to do that right now. I'd be interested, in serving on. There is the healthcare, committee. I think healthcare is one of the things that I hear every day from voters is so important. I think the pandemic as well has taught us that, healthcare costs have increasingly moved up, and we don't have a system that really protects and offers people affordable and accessible healthcare. I know what the process having served, in Congress, I know how it works. I know it's not really the choice of the member. They kind of come in and they list their preferences and they hope to get passed. I have been speaking with some members in Congress and have been talking about some of these priorities that I mentioned to you, Todd. And I do think that I'm providing a perspective that is missing. I think we have a lot of great members from a lot of different industries. Technology is not one that we have yet. But I think in Virginia's 8th, we could be a leader in that respect. We could come out and actually be a leader in forming and shaping a lot of these policies that are going to affect our economy, not only in Virginia's 8th, but the growing digital economy across the US industry and globally.
I should point out that in March of 2021, Governor Northam signed a Virginia data privacy bill, but it takes effect on January 1, 2023. Mary,
Yeah.
you're our next questioner.
Hi, Victoria. Mary Detweiler here. Thanks so much for running. I know that you need to look things through the lens of the 8th Congressional District, but I wanted to ask you a question. Education is a very hot topic right now, particularly with Governor Youngkin's recent moves and some of the pushback to that. And I wondered if you've had a chance to think about the idea of charter schools being 20 of them or whatever scattered around Virginia, the idea of lab schools that are affiliated with universities and colleges in a local area, if those would be an overall benefit in the 8th Congressional District or Virginia as a whole, because I know your outlook would be for Virginia as a whole too, or whether they would detract in some way financially from current public school funding and the like. But just general comments on that whole movement afoot. Thank you.
Yeah. So, I'm aware that education at the federal level, a lot of our education policies are decided at the state and local level. And so, what is the role of the federal government, in education? Obviously, throughout history, I think there have been landmark legislation to help our education policy. When you bring up a great point, Mary, it is a very, hot topic right now. When we think about our education system, how do we create the best education system that supports all of our families and our children, who really are the future of this society and leaders of our economy. So I worked at Communities in Schools. It's a nonprofit, here. It's a national nonprofit. We have a local nonprofit here. I spent some time working at Barcroft Elementary School. And what I learned from those experiences was the ways in which our public school system here in the district operates, especially the differences between a lot of our North Arlington schools and then our schools in South Arlington. We have Communities in Schools also has a presence in down in Alexandria. So a lot of my thoughts around this are informed by the time that I spent working. I take a lot of our policies. We have a whole roundtable of policy advisors that advise the campaign on these issues, and a lot of our education policy comes from Communities in Schools, actually. And a lot of what I learned there was, how can we support the public school system that we have, especially when we have such a majority of families that are relying on the public school system for education. A lot of what I learned about there is that, the kid is, if there are a lot of external factors facing the child, that child will have a much harder time achieving academic success in school. So when I think about this question, Charles, I think about how can we support the family and the child so that no matter what education system they're in, they're set to succeed. This means three things. It means housing stability for families. Housing instability is the single largest predictor that affects academic success, especially in our working class and middle class families. The second is food. A lot of our schools have food programs, and oftentimes that's the majority time where a child will get their nutrition from. Third is economic mobility. How can we ensure that the families have good jobs, that families have economic stability so that they're able to maintain their household and their kids? A lot of our policies are really focused on that holistic approach so that the child can and will succeed. I'm very concerned because I did look at the achievement gap right now in the district, especially throughout the pandemic. A lot of our Black and brown kids are falling on the lower end of the scale, and this is in elementary school. So we've got to do something about it. And I believe the best way forward is to have a holistic approach that we're supporting not just the child, but the family as a whole so that the child can succeed.
Okay, JD Spain has the next question.
Thank you, and welcome. Good morning, or actually good afternoon, folks. It's Democrats. Victoria, question for you. So as Democrats, right, and I like to go back to the platforms like the Bible for us. Democrats believe healthcare is a right, diversity is our strength, the economy should work for everyone, and that at the end of the day, facts and truth matter. So as you put forward this campaign, how are you looking to be a more inclusive leader and bring more folks to the table to engage in all these policies and initiatives that you have brought to the forefront?
That's a great question, JD. And how it starts in the very beginning. It starts when you launch your campaign. It starts with the people that you surround yourself with. I'm a member of the Latino community and the Indian American community because that's where my parents are from. But I'm an ally of many communities, such as the LGBTQ community. I'm an ally of the disabilities community. I don't have a lived experience that gives me the perspective to understand what it's like to be someone whose policies are impacting that community. That's why I made the decision from the very beginning to bring in people who are members of communities all across our district to help inform the policies that we're putting, because it is so important that the policies that are designed for community members are made by the communities for whom the policies are designed to serve. And I believe that sort of discussion, when you combine someone who's an expert or someone who comes from the community along with seasoned policymakers, that combination is so powerful. And I've seen it both in my time working on the Hill to my time working in the private sector lead to the best outcomes than just having, one monolith of people. So we've sought to do that in every area of policy that we are proposing as part of our platform. I would love to hear about the issues that you guys talk about, here in this group. We've obviously have a lot of information already. Bob, thanks for sending, but we'd love to welcome any one of you to join and share issues that affect your community and things that we can change at the federal level.
Okay, could you possibly summarize for just a minute, Victoria, and be sure to mention where your website is?
Absolutely. Is there a chat?
Yes, there is. It's a little comic bubble at the top of your screen.
Perfect. I can plug in the website into the chat and the email that we can be reached at.
Okay. But please do just spend a minute with concluding remarks.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Bob and Senior Lunch, for inviting me here to share lunch with you today on Tuesday, February 8th. I am a daughter of this district. I'm running because I want to serve the community that raised me. I believe that it's important to include different perspectives at the table because we are stronger when we come together. As I'm speaking to Senior Lunch here, I cannot help but think of my parents who are entering into their senior years, but for whom economic stability and healthcare costs continue to rise, which do not provide them a safe landing as retirement. I want to make it so that every person in America here has an equal opportunity, has a chance. I believe it's incumbent upon the government to provide a safety net so that if you work hard, if you contribute to our community, you will be taken care of. I believe these are fundamental pillars of our democracy, of the values that we hold as a Democratic Party. I'm proud to be a Democrat. I'm proud to be running in the Democratic primary. And I'm here always to hear you, to hear your concerns. I'm going to put my email in the chat. Please don't hesitate to reach out with any articles that you have, any questions, with anything that you want to talk about. I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us. And of course, you're free to stay through the rest of the lunch if you wish, and to eat while you stay. But we are going to shift now to our other.
I had one more question. I've been trying to get in. Could I ask one last question?
Okay, very briefly, Derek.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. Victoria, we had a longtime county board member named Al Eisenberg, and he had a principle. You may have been asked this question before, but it was particularly germane in a primary election. And the principle is basically that if you're gonna primary somebody, there has to be something that you're advocating that they're not doing, something that they're doing wrong. And from what I'm hearing, you sound like a good progressive Democrat, but so is Don Beyer. So can you elaborate just a little bit more on that for me?
Yes, absolutely. So, I'm so thankful for the congressman for his service to the district, and not only to the district, to Virginia. He's a long history of serving our great Commonwealth. You know, I'm running because I believe that it is important to build the bench of the Democratic Party. I'm running to build a bridge to the future. I'm running because I believe it's time to pass the torch, and I am ready. I'm on the bench. Put me in, coach, because I'm ready to come and serve this community. I believe you're right. You know, there are a lot of people ask, you know, why should I go for you, you know, and not our congressman? I don't think that a vote for me is a vote against the congressman. I think a vote for me and support for me is the belief that we need to build the bench of the Democratic Party. It is a belief that we need to expand our electorate if we want to keep Virginia. We are registering voters. We are bringing new people into the political process, and they're coming because of me. They're coming because of the ways in which we are reaching out. I believe that is so important to our democracy. It's so important here for the Virginia Democratic Party, the Democratic Party of Virginia. And I think that voters don't need it. This is not about bad. It's not bad versus good. It's about what do we want our future to look like, and how can we continue building on the success of our predecessors and pass the torch on to the next generation.
Okay. Well, I really do think we owe the second half of our program a good piece of time, so I'm going to cut off debate now. I want to just preface this discussion with the fact that I have believed for a long time that it is very important that we as Democrats appreciate that schools is probably one of the largest places where we devote our resources. It's our future. We all believe in good schools, and that the schools community is not necessarily coextensive with the Democratic Party. There's certainly a large number of people we have in common, but there were some statistics given out that probably Arlington has one of the lowest percentage of population with consisting of parents with school-age kids compared to other jurisdictions, which makes building a coalition in favor of high-quality schools a little more difficult, because people who are single or who are empty nesters do not have as much skin in the game. Although I think for the past 3 or 4 decades, we've been very good at building that coalition and convincing everybody, whether you have children or not, that you do have a stake in a high quality education. And for that, then I think it's really good that we spend some time with some parents. I'm going to turn it over to Katie to introduce the rest of her group and explain their organization, A.P.E. And I urge you to give them a very warm welcome and your careful consideration. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Bob. Good afternoon to everyone. We are super grateful for this opportunity to present to you, and we've been fully warned that you are a hot bench. As the invitation to this lunch noted, we're representatives of Arlington Parents for Education, or A.P.E. It's a bipartisan 501c4 organization. We didn't start out that way, but over the summer we formalized our organization. Though everyone that is here today is a Democrat. We feel strongly that education will continue to dominate the national and state elections, and therefore it is imperative that Democrats fully understand why parents have been activated beyond what we hear or what the talking heads say on cable news. I'll also note, if you want to learn more about our organization and what our views are on various issues, you can sign up for our newsletter, and I'll put a link to that in the chat. For this presentation, it's very substantive. We have a slide deck that we will go through, and we welcome questions, but we do want to make sure that we can get through the material, because I think it will really inform a productive discussion of the issues that we think are most important. So before we get into the presentation, I think we'll just quickly introduce ourselves. My name is Katie Sunderland, and I have a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old. I moved to Arlington in 2016 because I was really excited about the schools and the easy commute. I have been involved with A.P.E. almost from the beginning, since about the summer of 2020, when I realized that it was a real question whether schools were going to open, and my family's a dual working household, so we were really freaking out back then. I'll turn to Todd.
Hi, my name is Todd Truitt. and I have a 6 and an 8-year-old. I'm divorced, so we split custody 50-50. I moved here at the end of 2014, and I lived in California before that for 13 years. I'm an Indiana native, but in California, I was involved with federal Democratic fundraising in Los Angeles and San Francisco. I've been a hardcore Democrat since I was in high school. Was at the opening night. I think I consider myself getting activated during opposing the Iraq War. Was at the opening night of the movie Fahrenheit 9/11, if anybody remembers the Michael Moore movie. And I really got involved in A.P.E. in this January of last year. I think by October of 2020, I'm a lawyer for KPMG. Most of my colleagues work in the New York City area, similar communities to Arlington and Connecticut, New York, and Westchester County, and New Jersey, and all of their kids were back in school by October. And by December, I realized that my kids were not going back to school, and I was like, "What is going on here?" That's when I started to realize there was something serious going on with the school system and why it was not reopening. So that's how I got involved.
Sorry, I was muted. Jennifer Wheelock.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Wheelock, and I'm a parent of 2. My daughter is in 3rd grade. She was 2nd grade last year. She's dyslexic, and we found that. And my son is 4 years old, and part of why I'm here today is to sort of bring some of that perspective of a parent of a student with a disability. It has very much influenced my involvement this year. Since, based on that experience, I've now joined the Arlington Special Education Advisory Committee as well as the Budget Advisory Committee, largely to better understand the systemic challenges facing students with disabilities in APS, and also to help better advocate on those issues, not just for my daughter, but more broadly. Professionally, I work for the House Budget Committee, for the House Representative Budget Committee for the Democrats. And I'm speaking today in my personal capacity, of course, from home, from my personal iPad. But as a parent, those are the issues that have motivated me and have influenced the kinds of activities I'm taking on in my volunteer time. But professionally, as someone who works for Congress and who is concerned about the outcome of the election this fall, I just see very much how we as a party continue to miss the mark on education issues in this moment. I'm very worried that if we don't define these issues, Republicans are more than willing to define them for us, and really hope that we will see proposals by those at every level of elected office, federal, state, and local, that really focus on centering and defining public education issues, from the concerns of the Democratic Party. And that's really, so those 2 things have sort of motivated my involvement in my desire to come and speak to you all today. Thank you.
Brian Walsh.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Brian Walsh. I've lived in Arlington for nearly 17 years now, when I relocated to the Washington metro area right out of grad school. My wife, Kathy, and I both work full-time. We have 2 kids, one of which is in preschool, a 2-year-old, she'll be 3 this week, and a 9-year-old. My 9-year-old has received special services from even before he was in kindergarten, from Arlington Public Schools for the early intervention program. And I, despite living here 17 and a half years, education and county matters were sort of like not exactly my political interest until right about this time last year, when I found Arlington Parents for Education. And my situation was similar to what Todd said, is there was still no date for returning kids to the classroom at this time last year. No date in sight. And my son is in 3rd grade now, but that means his last normal year was kindergarten. because of, well, we'll go into the timeline of the presentation. So a lifelong Democrat, I believe not only that we need flourishing public schools in Arlington, but a flourishing public education system nationwide. And I firmly believe, like Jennifer said, that I think Democrats really need to reclaim this issue to be successful, and for the sake of successful for themselves and also for the sake of our schools.
Thank you. Sheila Leonard.
Hi, my name is Sheila Leonard. I have 3 kids. They were only 12 weeks, 4 and 6, started, but now they're 2, and the 2 are in second grade and kindergarten. I work full time every day for the federal government, which is why I'm, like Jennifer, in my car off site on my personal phone. I worked every day in person during the pandemic, starting in June. So that really impacted, you know, my kids' experience and my family's experience. My husband is also a federal employee. I really liked what you said, Mr. Platt, about a coalition of support for high quality education. My mom was a teacher in Fairfax County. My sister's currently an elementary teacher, and I just grew up in this liberal family that really supported Arlington, because at the time, I've been here a little over 10 years, the salaries were the highest, and it really felt like this, you know, giant bureaucracy of Fairfax wasn't able to really devote to the kids and to the staff the way Arlington could. And of course, my thoughts have changed a little bit in that time. I've been involved for a long time with APS. I was on the Budget Advisory Committee before my kids were in school. I'm currently VP of my PCA. I'm also on the Arlington, the Friends of the Arlington Library Board. I'm a big supporter of our public libraries as well. And last up in my kind of individual capacity several times. My daughter is very social, loves school. For Christmas last year, the one thing she wanted was to be in school, which, you know, if any, like, it's pretty heartbreaking to hear things you can't get the but really for me it was they had shortened elementary school days last year, 80 minutes, 20% of the day. And Fairfax, when they went back into had regular days, like full length days, but Arlington never made that change. And I communicated with board members and with staff, and they just had no reason. And I had a lot earlier than my 5 to be able to pick my daughter up, and I had a lot of mission impact, you know, on my job, which I care a lot about, and also on my kids. And so I think, you know, I'm really here for good governance and high quality for our public education system.
Thanks, Sheila. I always forget to mention this, but my mother is actually currently a 65-year-old DCPS teacher as well, currently working, and my husband is an educator as well. Miranda, do you want to introduce yourself and then kick us off?
Yes, thank you. My name is Miranda Turner. I live in South Arlington. I have a 4th grader, a 1st grader, and an APS preschooler. I'm a lawyer, as is my husband. And I'm going to try to share my screen. Thank you, Bob, for setting that up. And I'm also going to mention, because I think it was really, oh boy, there's a lot of windows here. It was really helpful to frame, Bob, the way you did in terms of the generational devotion to our public schools. That really hit home for me. I think I'm struggling with the sharing of the screen here for a second.
I think if you share one app rather than the entire screen, it might reduce it by a window. But it looks like if you just share one app, rather than sharing
the present button. Hit the present button in the upper right.
Yeah, no, I know. It's just not clicking through the.
Yeah, now hit the present. There you go.
Here we
go.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
You. Thank you for the technical support.
See that, right? I can see that.
Everybody good?
Yes.
Okay. Well, anyway, thank you, Bob, for the framing, because that's exactly what we hope to convey today, which is really tying a couple of threads together. One, our local public schools and the effect locally that we all felt as parents with kids in APS public schools, and sort of the things that showed us and taught us about our schools, our local governance, and why that matters really both for our local officials and elections, but as we saw last year, statewide elections. And we are sort of going to run through some slides that hit on different themes, but the effort here is to show that these education issues are, as Katie said, a little bit more nuanced than sometimes what gets portrayed in the media, and it has real consequences, as we all saw last fall, and there's reason to be concerned, I think, for this year, for this fall. I am going to send it to Todd briefly to talk about these slides on the margins, because Northern Virginia turned out to be a pretty impactful area that resulted in electing Governor Youngkin last fall. And I think we're all seeing and feeling the consequences of that pretty much immediately, especially this past month and going forward. Todd, can you do this slide?
Sure. No, and this comes from my background of growing up in a very Republican area in Indiana. And my Democratic senator winning it and telling me, he's like, yeah, I did great on the margins in your area versus usual. And that was really my first lesson on why margins matter. But anyway, like Youngkin won statewide by around 63,700 votes. So what I did here was I looked at really the margins of the 4 largest Nova counties and how they shifted. And you see here versus 2017. And you see here a significant shift of Nova counties. If you were just to take those 4 counties represented 26% of the 2-party vote. If you were to just take those 4 counties, and if McAuliffe had won them by the same margin that Northam had, you're talking 31,000 votes right there. Now, if you look at your other margin, and Nova was one of the areas with probably some of the biggest school closures on the East Coast. And if you look at some of the other major metros as well, and Richmond, as well as the Hampton Roads area, then you can see the margins would be right there alone. Because I hear, oh, well, rural turned out, et cetera, et cetera. But you see right here, Nova made a significant difference for Youngkin's victory. So anyway, that's why we're trying to say, hey, these Nova counties stayed blue, but they didn't stay as blue, and they made a material difference on whether a Democrat won or not.
Yeah, and I think there were post-election analyses and focus groups that suggested that these education issues really did move the needle for people beyond the CRT type of issues, the culture war type of stuff that Governor Youngkin absolutely exploited successfully on the campaign trail. But it's very clear from his actions even coming in, right, that he thinks he's got a mandate for parents, and he is trying to push that through in various ways. And it's important because elections have consequences. So from our perspective, one thing that it's important to sort of level set on is Virginia was not a leader in returning kids to school, to in-person education following the closures of the pandemic. This chart shows it graphically by state. The darker color, the more in-person school across the board within the state the children had in public school. And then this puts some granularity onto Virginia. We were 44th in the United States in terms of in-person days. And just to tie it to the regional swings that Todd was talking about, it was different even within the state of Virginia. The Northern Virginia school districts, generally speaking, did not reopen for public in-person education until about March of 2021, which was later than many districts in Virginia, which got kids back to varying degrees, and even some had 4 or 5 days a week all year long. Why does this matter? Public schools are incredibly important. Bob talked about it at the beginning. I won't belabor the point, but they've lost a lot of students, and college enrollment has also declined by a significant amount. This is really concerning, I think, from a societal level. Obviously, we as parents are concerned, but this is our future, and we all believe strongly that the public schools are a great way to prepare the next generation for the future. And these are the types of local issues that really resonate with voters. And I think that unfortunately, Terry learned that a little bit the hard way, in addition to having limited backup at the national level. As many parents have said, including myself, when it's your own kids, it's really hard to care about any other issue when it comes to the ballot box. So I'm going to pivot briefly and talk about how we got here in Arlington. I made a commitment to Bob that I would try to blow through these slides pretty quickly. I'm absolutely happy to come back on any of them if that would be helpful to folks, but I am going to try to respect you all's time and leave time for questions. So schools closed in spring of 2020. Everyone remembers, no one disagrees that at the time that was what happened. That was what had to happen, I'm sorry. What did happen in APS that made us a little bit of an outlier regionally and nationally was, one, the decision not to provide any new instruction at all to any children who were in the public schools, and two, a decision for younger children not to provide any access to their teachers or instruction at all. So the older children, no new content. We're going to do a lot of review. We're going to circle back to concepts, but we're not going to teach you what normally would be taught in the fourth quarter. For the younger children, schools were really and truly effectively closed. My oldest was in second grade at Drew at the time, and the rule from APS was no instruction, period. So she went from her beloved teacher every school day to 30 minutes a week at the order of APS. This was something that was done in the name of equity, and equity is important, but I submit that my daughter going to a school where 61% of the students received free meals, a substitute paper packet printed in fewer languages than the children speak, and something that needs to be read by parents to their children. Lots of these parents were not in the home. I was, and I could support my children, and I did. And I think that that's really actually the opposite of equity. So I had real concerns about that. And from a sort of oversight and governance perspective, that was really a first significant issue that affected the entire school system that the school board didn't vote on. Both of those decisions and the lack of a vote, I think, made APS different than some of the other regional school districts. It also began a pattern, unfortunately, of our school board not voting. And I mention it because it is an important governance issue. Our school board locally did not vote on the decision to begin the 2020 school year virtually. It did not vote on the fact that in-person instruction for students with disabilities and English language learners and our youngest learners was still provided virtually. Some of those children eventually were allowed to go into the buildings. They were monitored by an aide and they were taught through the iPad. There was no vote on that. And this is something that our local and state and CDC guidance would have allowed to happen. There was no vote on the decision to return in March 2021. Obviously, parents were pleased with that, but again, something that should have been voted on. The elementary school day was shortened by 80 minutes every day for elementary school the entire school year. And of course, Mondays were no live instruction at all year long. Those things were not voted on. The results were extensive, kids out of school, and I will get to a few slides in a minute that show, unfortunately, the academic results of that. I just want to take a minute to note that APS did do some surveys, and early on in June 2020 and July 2020, there was a sentiment among parents reflected in these surveys that a majority wanted to go back to some form of in-person, and that really changed a little bit, but it was split. I would say throughout the entire school year. And one of the things that Arlington Parents for Education advocated for last year was this choice, right? This is an unusual school year. Let's let families decide what their circumstances are, what their risk tolerances are, how their children are faring in a virtual environment, and proceed from there. So we've broken it down here so that you can see some demographic differences. Then, of course, there were actual results of when we did go back in person. I'm going to skip through this pretty quickly. Again, it was a split. And so here I'm going to get to the significant evidence of learning loss. So we've put these slides together, and what they display is elementary school standardized test results for, on the top, the five schools in APS where the students receive percentage-wise fewest free and reduced meals. These are the failure rates. So in a pre-pandemic year in white, the percentage of kids who are failing the reading test. And then you can see the increases displayed in the orange bars. So the top of the line is the 5 wealthiest schools in Arlington, and below the line are the schools, the 5 where students, the majority of students receive free and reduced meals in Arlington. Drew is at 61%, Pearland Springs I think is over 80%. And you can see the differences. These children were already, there's an achievement gap. I think everybody knows that in Arlington. These children were already prone to struggle on the standardized test. The pandemic has made it much worse. This is the same thing for math. And I'll note that the bars go farther out, all the way up to 100. So at the lowest levels, unfortunately, about 80% of the students within one of our elementary schools did not pass the math standardized test last year. And the same thing for science.
Miranda, did you mention the cut scores for reading?
I'm sorry, I didn't. That's right. So there is a difference in scales here. This one only goes up to 75 just for purposes of display. The standardized test for reading, the pass score is set by the state. Last year, there was a decision taken by the state school board on which Dr. Duran sits to lower the pass score for reading. So this is not strictly an apples to oranges or an apples to apples comparison, because these children taking the test in 2020 to 2021 were subject to a lower pass score. So actually what you see reflected here, of course, is increased failure rates, and that is as against a lower score that you had to achieve in order to pass. So there's every reason to suspect that the reading scores are very concerning. Okay, another thing to mention in terms of results of the pandemic, Arlington Public Schools saw a significant enrollment decline. We've compared it to Fairfax here, and I'm not going to belabor the point, but just to say that enrollment really matters for a couple of reasons. One, enrollment is, this decline in enrollment, 2,000 students out from APS over the past 2 years, it's really a red flag. I think it was a red flag for election purposes. The students haven't really come back this year, which leads me to think it may be another red flag for this election. And it tends to speak to some level of trust in your public institutions, which is all something that we want to the good for our strong public schools. So that's one reason it matters. And another reason it matters is because it, in Arlington, is a significant driver of how we set our budget and how we fund our public schools. And so what we see here is a decline of about 2,000 students. And I've heard it said that this indicates, oh, well, we've sort of hit our peak in enrollment projection. We've caught up to our growth, and maybe this is potentially a good thing. I can't say if that's true or not, but what I can say is these students leaving APS was known at the time of the budget vote in May 2021. So the school board had information that enrollment was significantly down. Dr. Cannon, to her credit, said we need to try to account for this somehow. They decided to account for maybe 500 students out, and they voted on a budget that was based on 1,500 fewer students, or I'm sorry, 1,500 more students than wound up showing up. And that had a huge effect on, one, the ability to compensate our teachers fairly, and two, on other proposed cuts, because we have to pay staff. It's a massive budget driver. And what happens is you have to start looking elsewhere for cuts. And that's a real problem in terms of the ability to provide a high quality public education, and also to continue to provide activities and the like. For our kids, middle school sports winds up being a perennial cut, and that's a really tough pill to swallow after a year or two of pandemic, I think. So Additional comparisons, again, I'm going to skip over the detail on this, except to say that APS saw some unenrollment that was greater than Fairfax, and it's really across the board at multiple grade levels. And this is the sort of data that, again, it's important to dig into to see how we can start seeing where our students are missing and maybe what we could do to start drawing them back and rebuilding trust in our public institutions. Just a quick note to say, as parents, things are really not quite back to normal in the same way for our children as they are for adults. What the ongoing COVID restrictions have done in an effort to keep schools safely open is, one, they've cost kids days in school. One of my daughters has missed 15 days of school due to quarantine only. She's not tested positive as a result of any of those, but she has missed the school. There are concerns that APS is not prioritizing its students in terms of both days in school and recovery, learning loss recovery, social emotional recovery, structure, stability, and additional time, additional instructional time, huge themes for kids trying to come back from this. It's really disruptive for working parents, which all of us on this call are, and that includes our teachers. Our teachers obviously need the ability to have their kids safely cared for in order to teach our kids. And then finally, emotional challenges. I think maybe everyone remembers the pause of sports and activities in January, where Arlington Public Schools was, I think, the only Virginia school district to implement that. And that sort of thing is again, another burden on our children that most adults are not bearing. There are concerns that as a result of this, we're going to backslide from educational excellence. And that is something that Arlington Parents for Education as a group, we're concerned about. The class sizes have increased, which means each student has less time with their children, with their teacher. There is a lot of time being spent on iPads and screen time. And as I mentioned earlier, the reading score, pass score was cut, which is a lowering of a standard that we think all kids ought to be able to meet. We've also had some significant missed opportunities here with federal funds, and I mentioned this again in connection with governance in addition to what's happening in Arlington. Our school board did not vote on some of the things that our federal money was used for, and unfortunately, we had the opportunity to provide an enhanced summer school last year, and we wound up spending more money to educate fewer kids. And I think that was a staffing issue and a planning issue. We could have used federal resources to help keep kids in school through a test to stay protocol. And we probably should have seen a school board vote on the fact that the majority of our federal rescue money was dedicated to the virtual learning program, which serves students who absolutely deserve a high quality education, and that's not what they got. The rollout of the program was very rocky, and there was major planning problems and staffing problems. So we think that there was a real missed opportunity with what to do with all of the federal relief that did come our way. There's concerns about lack of engagement, again, a governance issue, an engagement issue, a strong community issue. We did not see many surveys of APS families after a certain point. The school board doesn't respond to public comment and limits its office hours. And I think it's been a very trying year, but it's really important to try to build back from that sort of thing. The voting thing I've covered already, and just want to say that one of the side effects of that is that the decision winds up resting entirely with the superintendent, and that sets him up for the potential to take a lot of blowback from the community when he's not elected, and there's a general lack of transparency around the budget process as well, as I alluded to. County board, I think this is not primarily a county presentation, and we largely talk about governance by the school board and about APS, but it's important to loop in the county board too. I think we're all Arlington. Parents and students are constituents of the county board also, and APS is a big chunk of the county board's budget every year. One thing recently that was frustrating to see, really, as we were coming back from winter break during the midst of an Omicron surge, was the county board disengaging from in what I personally view as its leadership obligations to come forward and comment publicly on the importance of keeping schools open. I mean, if we've got President Biden running on the issue and President Biden campaigning for president, saying that he thinks the schools should open, I think our local leaders can do it too. So I mentioned the county board also as a transition to our next slide, which I'm going to kick to Jennifer, because lest you think we do, I'm going to skip some of these other slides, but I'd be happy to come back to them. Lest you think that we...
Sorry, I just want to say one thing on the county board. The county board, while at a recent CivFed meeting, they refused to comment on the importance of keeping schools open, as Miranda said, as the Omicron surge was happening. They did seem to change their tune once Youngkin was elected, and now have come out strong in favor of mask mandates.
So lest you think that we sit around and put these slides together just to complain, I'm going to throw it to Jennifer now, because we do see a lot of areas where the community really can come together for the good of our students. And I want to emphasize, which Jennifer will take over for me, that this is going to be something that needs to be looked at over the long term, right? This year is just the first year back. It's still pandemic interrupted, and our students are still trying to find their way back in a school setting. I think you can hear that from any teacher and any principal. You know, things are different, and our kids are struggling, but we can get them back. And Jennifer, why don't you talk a little bit about the things on this slide?
Miranda,
These are good.
I was just saying, I just wanted to introduce the prior slide very quickly, because there was a number of things that, you know, where this lack of accountability resulted in the election and we know many parents that were first-time Republican voters that voted for Biden and went and voted for Youngkin over these issues because they felt like they did not have local leadership, and they felt like that their only remedy was to vote at the state level politically. And so these local, and we showed the election results already, but you know, these local governance issues matter a lot, where, you know, we're a Democratic county and we need to govern well. Otherwise, people seek state level remedies politically. So just to transition into, you know, our local governance kind of, you know, proposals.
And then I'll just sort of speak briefly on this. This is kind of, some of these ideas have come out of things I've heard various folks sort of say from my time on ASAC and back as well. But, you know, and I think that these are also things that we're seeing in other communities too, including, for example, today in DC, there was a news story released about additional funding that they're setting aside for their schools. I think that, I think, Robert, you alluded to at the beginning that we have a relatively small population is actually in school. We know that, I know from my time on back, that we dedicate less of our revenues to public schools, and part of that is driven by the fact that we have fewer students in school. I get that, I understand that. We also understand that this is a very unique time, and the challenges that our students face are unlike anything that they have faced in prior years. Some of you may have served on the school board or county board in the past. This is a very unique moment. We're not rising to the occasion to meet this moment. We know this is going to be a 2 to 3 year or a multi-year process to address not just the learning loss, but their social emotional development. I'm sure you've seen many of the stories about these kinds of things. I really believe that as I sort of see the budgetary challenges that APS is still likely to face this year and in the coming years, that I think that I would love to see the county board support a 2 to 3 year commitment above the revenue agreement, and it would be specifically tied to student recovery, learning loss, social emotional, et cetera. It would be a monitoring item. It would be separate from the general transfer that's done. It would be perhaps even tied to a pandemic recovery committee with parents who sit on some of these other advisory committees to sort of inform that discussion. But I do believe that I think the needs are there. I think we saw, for your awareness, APS applied for a $15 million grant from the state in which they identified additional needs that they have to address learning recovery. They're very unlikely to get anywhere near the 15 million. That's a good starting place in my point of, in my view of, okay, what unmet needs do you have, APS, and how can we support that? Where there is an application that they've done that work in, but again, they're likely to maybe get at best $1 million or so from the state, and I'm happy to explain why that would be. I think that I think that it's important for us as we move forward, and really we saw this in the ACDC meeting last week, that the county board and the school board provide a joint forum, a 5-and-5 sort of joint forum. It hasn't been done for a very long time, where to hear from the community. I think that we saw from the meeting last week that there's plenty to discuss publicly and to ask questions of both boards together, and to ask our county and to really present this case to the county board as well too. We know that they care about these issues. We know that they care about APS, but sometimes, you know, what I'm just sort of seeing is that it's that connecting of the dots. And I really just, I believe that we need to sort of go back to having those joint public meeting, county board, school board meetings that have happened in the past, but haven't happened in recent years. I think that, you know, and I think we also talk here about some additional responsibility, you know, with regards to APS governance, you know, more votes on things, and improving engagement with constituents. And here, actually, I'll sort of say I'm very pleased with Mary Kadera's recent engagement on a number of issues, and looking forward to her tenure on the committee as someone who has been very responsive to constituents and sort of said, hey, let me take those. Those are good questions. Let's take those back and see what we can find out. And I really have appreciated that. So anyhow, those are just some ideas there. I also would hope that ACDC would create space in their meetings for not just a school board representative to speak, but perhaps also from other people in the community to come and speak to, you know, the APS budget or issues that various other constituent groups might have, and so that we're not just having a brief from a school board member.
Okay, well, why don't we cut off the presentation here? I think we were sort of at the end anyway.
Yes.
But the point is that we want to save at least 20 minutes for questions from the audience, and I'm sure you guys are willing to stay with us for a reasonable period of time. I'll start off with the first question. Katie, if you could only have one thing to ask of the Arlington Democrats, what would be your number one ask?
Yeah, I would say that Jennifer's point was pretty good. It's just allowing us to come in and speak. I think that understanding and perhaps maybe by allowing other voices to come in, because I do feel like a lot of the education discussions that I see, at least in the Arl Dems Facebook group, which is perhaps not representative of the Arl Dems committee, is focused a lot on CRT. You know, it's focused a lot on mask mandates, it's focused a lot on vaccine mandates or banning books, and those are important issues, and I do think that probably helped rile up Youngkin's base, but I don't think that there's a Democrat that switched sides because of that. You know, that wasn't winning over the parent vote, especially not in Northern Virginia. I don't know one person who cared about those issues.
Okay.
Does someone
else have a question? Victoria?
Thank you so much for that excellent presentation and walking us through the challenges, but also the opportunities that we have ahead of us. I just want to echo, you know, I also saw in the I've never seen the Republican inroads in immigrant communities that I grew up in here in Northern Virginia than I saw this past November. It was scary. And I talk to voters every day, and there are a lot of parents who tell me they have become single issue Democratic primary voters who have become single issue voters on education. And I think the importance of what you presented is crucial as we move forward, not just to better our education system, but as Democrats. And my question, you know, I guess is when we look at what I have found in from my professional experience, you know, working in the education system, is that the achievement gap is really along socioeconomic and racial lines. One, have you also found that? I mean, I know we laid out the schools, and obviously we know some schools, you know, the demographics, but have you seen that? That's one question. And two, you know, how can we include specific policies to help address those racial and socioeconomic differences within our community?
Yeah, it's a great question, and thank you for sort of bolstering the importance of education, because I'm not a single issue voter, but boy, this was, you know, very impactful the past couple of years. So yes, I think the short answer is those slides were really intended to demonstrate both the degree of learning loss, but which communities were hit harder. And it can be done by racial and ethnic demographics, but here in Arlington, what you see most is our schools are economically segregated, especially at the elementary level. And so it was a very easy thing to do, to just take the lowest 5 and the highest 5 and compare them, and visually it's incredibly stark. So I think that's a huge concern, and the point that always needs to be made is there is a pre-existing achievement gap, especially along demographic lines. And I live in Green Valley, and I remember the Green Valley Civic Association having to FOIA data out of Arlington Public Schools in like 2015 because they were combining the test scores for the neighborhood program and the Montessori program and not being straight with the community about how their kids were doing. And it is a long-running problem that no one has been able to solve. So to get to your last piece, how do we solve it? What do we do? I think one of the things we as an organization try to do is look at actual evidence-based indicators for some of this stuff. It's education, it's social science, it's very squishy, and there isn't a lot out there. But one of the things that appears to be a real driver is more instructional time. And if you look at a lot of the plans in our neighboring jurisdictions like Prince William and Fairfax, they have built-in extra tutoring, intensified tutoring. DC Public Schools, the funding that they announced that Jennifer mentioned, one thing they announced last year was tutoring for like the 10% of kids who are identified as the highest need. This is more time. Accelerated learning is what we're doing in Arlington. It's great. It sounds like, you know, we'll just accelerate those kids right on back up to speed, but it's not magic. You need time for it. And that is something that costs money. And so, you know, I hate to say that the answer is always more money, but really we've got to be funding this appropriately as a long-term problem, which it is going to be, and using those funds in support of the kids who need it most and figuring out what will help them the most. And I think the few things that we know can have the potential to do that is more instructional time.
Thanks so much.
If I may just sort of just respond to you, Victoria, there too, just to add on to what Miranda said. I mean, we know, you know, we have the data from last year's SOLs. What we don't have, and it's been very hard to get to have APS publicly discuss, are the beginning of year assessments that they did. That would be very informative as to if we're seeing that gap between schools and the gaps between students, which we expect that we will see, right? I think that to have more transparency around that and more public discussion around that is really imperative, and it's just really not happening. As someone who watches all of these things, people in the parents of students with disabilities keep asking these questions about recovery services for their students, about the plans to sort of help catch them up. And there's not really a systemic effort that we can see. If it's happening, APS should be discussing it, but we don't really see the evidence of that. And I could imagine that if we did really see sort of additional support for these things and we had the data for it, I would hope that APS would dedicate those some of those resources proportionally to those schools or those student groups who had the greatest area of need, right? And so that's maybe my take on that.
Callie, do you want to ask a question?
Sure do, or I may have to. I think, first of all, the issue of more instructional time is basic. I started working in early childhood education in Virginia's Quality Child Care in 1980, and the answer has always been more instructional time. This isn't rocket science. And it has frustrated me no end. And that the county has never come around to the basic. I mean, people need housing, they need stability, they need food, they need instructional time. And the county has within its power to address easily two of those things, which are nutrition and instructional time. And we're a wealthy county, and it has always bothered me. But my two questions are, one of the things you listed was the nomination process or the caucus process for choosing school board. And I just want to know, what is it that you would like to see as a replacement? Do you want to see a primary process? I mean, I don't think we get to the point, because the Democrats fought hard to get back the idea that they could endorse or establish preferences in the selection of school board members. But what would you like to see in its place of the caucus?
Right. I actually think there's a difference of opinion just among those of us on this call about this. For me, I think, especially, given the strong preference, I think, displayed among voting members to provide an endorsement, what I would like to see is to have the process revised in order to increase turnout in a big way and make sure it really is truly an inclusive process that gets more voters involved across the county. So I think, as a matter of actual steps to take, put it later in the cycle. I think Katie mentioned this at the last Arl Dems meeting. Campaigning for school board, folks are always saying, oh no, I already voted, I mailed in my ballot, it's fine. And they had no idea that a school board race, they thought they were early, but you're late. No, you're late for the school board race, it's already happened. So I think putting it later in the cycle would be something that you can do, getting it as close to tucked up to another race that draws more attention to it. And then really, Arl Dems absolutely does a great job at supporting candidates and providing forums even, but let's talk more about it. And this gets to what Jennifer and Katie were saying. Let's make schools really a more prominent piece of meetings, and school board candidates, let's do more than one forum, or let's have a questionnaire, or let's host meet and greets and treat them the same way as some of the other bigger ticket candidates.
Callie, I just wanted to jump in on your instructional time point. Totally agree. It's been a long time discussing and of importance. Unfortunately, in Arlington, we're actually going backwards. We've removed 5 days from the calendar. Okay, so that's all I was going to share. So we've added World Holiday.
Callie, do you have a second question?
I did, and it goes to the relationship between the school board and the county board. I'm a little process driven. Well, let me ask thing. So none of you are advocating that we have a primary for school board members on the Democratic side, because that is the most open and the one that brings in the most participation.
I don't think you can, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say, in terms of if I had my way, I would want to see district seats in addition to like all county-wide seats. Like, I think that if you had district seats, then it would be a lot easier for someone very involved in their community to canvass their neighborhood, and people would know them, and then they could speak and represent those voices in a better way. I also think it would wrest some control away from the Arl Dems, because it would be harder to field an endorsee in every single district, right? It's more races, a limit on who you can endorse. And like, I do feel strongly that, given that where we live, that we shouldn't be precluding federal employees from running, and having a primary precludes that. So I think the answer to that would be, I do think we need districts. And I hear the concern about, splitting the vote between Democratic minded candidates, and then you get a right winger in there. And that concern just seems very theoretical to me. There's 5 seats right now. There should be more. If you get one crazy on there, what are they going to do? Force a conversation on hard issues? So, or at least make that be a problem, and then we address it. Like, I think that we are not approaching this the right way. And what it really has actually done, not theoretical, what it has actually done is prevented a very highly qualified federal employee from running. So
let me interject that I don't think the debate has been whether someone crazy gets on the school board. I think the problem is that while everything we've discussed here today is just absolutely wonderful and germane, if someone really demagogic, someone who was like anti-science, anti-evolution, prayer in the schools, that was sort of their platform. I think that the whole process was designed to make it difficult for someone like that to waste everyone's time. That was really the motivation, at least 20 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, and then that's sort of what I meant. That's the only justification for it, I think, and it's an important one. I'm not trying to dismiss that.
I think it made more sense, Bob, when we were still fighting the ghosts of segregation. And you really did have pushes for district representation and whatnot to continue some of the really awful practices that had preceded the democratic control of the school board and the county board, and before we had elected school boards. So, when we were moving from appointed to elected, and when we had people who were still worrying about whether Metro was going to bring those people to Arlington, we were looking at a very different time. You can tell how old we are.
My mom was in high school here when all that happened.
So, well, just to call in a token young person, Mary Detweiler, do you have any questions?
Thank you. I had to unmute. I'm used to Zoom. I just want, this has been really a wonderful discussion. I'm so glad that all the slides were presented. Everything, I think we all learned a great deal. I do want to mention, though, that the website, the Arlington Parents for Education, the main theme, at least 2 days ago, was open the schools. Well, we did that a couple months ago. So now it seems to me that a lot of the kinds of policies and activities you're advocating need to be very clearly spelled out on that website so people can know exactly what this group is going to do, other than something that looks very past oriented. So I just want to make that comment. I've had several people say, I looked at the website, but it says open the schools. What do I get out of that? So anyway, that's how people have been reacting to me. But the other thing I wanted to mention, and I have a neighbor who's been a teacher for a long time, very, very fine teacher. And throughout all that pre-vaccine time, I would get her perspective on things. She's divorced, knows that she is responsible for taking care of herself. Her kids live in other states. She was quite afraid of coming down with COVID and having long-term effects or who knows what. And there were no vaccines for her. And so she was very afraid to go into the classroom. She hated teaching by Zoom or whatever system was set up for her. And then when schools finally began to tippy-toe and open up, she was okay with that. But by that time, she was frustrated as anything with the constant attack on her for being lazy and not wanting to go to school. And anyway, she quit early. We've lost a wonderful, wonderful teacher, in my opinion. She says she has colleagues who have the same feeling about that. They felt personally attacked. And I'm sure that there are plenty of arguments on both sides as to how the teachers' union will react. But I just wanted to share that perspective because sometimes we forget about the teachers, and we're losing teachers. We know if it's a warm body, put it in the school to be a substitute. I'll take it. That's really unfortunate. It's been a tough time for the kids, for the teachers, for the administrators, and the parents. So
yeah.
Thank you.
Mary,
can I just say, I think that's a very, very valid point. I think among the vast majority of us, what we're not talking about was the situation in March 2020. We didn't know what was going on with the virus. We didn't know whether schools were going to be a transmittal vector. What we're talking about, at least from my perspective, was this time last year when there was no real timeline to return to school, and when bars and restaurants were opening wide the doors, and the schools in our county were still shut without any plan. Every single private school by this time last year had found a way to safely reopen. That's not to dismiss the concerns of teachers. I have, a team that I manage in the office that, similar issues once we started to go back into a hybrid setting. On the issue of the demands this is placed on teachers, I think there's now, what students are my son, for instance, is not performing at grade level. Okay, and third grade is a very pivotal year. In fact, they're most, third grade, your progress in third grade sort of predicts your trajectory throughout high school more so than any other year. But what we've done in Arlington through decisions that were made, instead of adding tutors and adding instructional time, we've just placed more demands on teachers to catch the kids up within the normal course of the school day. And that's not fair to the kids, but more so it's not fair to the teachers. My son receives physical therapy, and you can imagine how hard it is to do on Zoom. And at the last IEP meeting, I won't say who, but one of his teachers was just breaking down in tears. So the stress on teachers is very real, and to see other neighboring districts use their American Rescue Plan funds for increased summer school, for increased tutor time, for other outside the classroom, catch-up programs, and Arlington not do that one bit it's a slap in the face to students, but more so, I think it's a slap in the face equally to teachers as well.
Yeah, and just to tie it briefly back to the governance point and the leadership point, what you had for the past 2 years was the sense that parents and teachers were being pitted against one another on these issues, and that shouldn't be the case. As Mary framed it so well, it really was, a matter of individual assessment early on, but once we hit, full vaccine, teachers prioritize, let's get it done. What we saw was APS not really leading the way, and parents wondering what happened, and teachers wondering what the plan was. I have friends who are teachers whose kids were enrolled in APS, and they were among the ones who were the most upset with sort of the lack of leadership and clear direction and planning to make this happen for everybody.
Yeah, and I would add on the governance part what we talked about earlier about school board voting, beyond, good governance of them vetting things, is that, you saw a lot of, the school board wasn't taking any responsibility on continuing to keep the school closed. It was really kind of putting it all on the appointed superintendent. He was getting a lot of heat as well. And some of that, that I think that he had described operational issues, which, could be a euphemism for teachers. And so some parents blame the teachers as well. I mean, that's why it's important for the school board members to step up and take a vote and say, no, we're going to make this decision, just like all of our neighboring counties did. This is the only county that we can find in Virginia that did not vote on these types of things. So, I think that matters for employee relations as well with teachers.
Well, I think the other problem with not voting, having worked for elected officials for a chunk of my life, is that we all know they can be directing staff. Staff can take the heat, and the people who are actually driving the decision are not being held accountable. And I think that having been in a staff position for many years, that's always something that I'm cognizant of when big decisions like this that take a lot of research and work and staffing time happen. The board members had to be aware all the time which way the superintendent was going and which way his work was going. And I think that not voting is a way of like having your cake and eating it too. So
well, and the messaging is important. My son was identified as needing summer school in April of last year. 3 weeks later, they said he will be provided summer school. 3 weeks later, they said no, he won't be provided summer school anymore. We don't have the staff to do it. And the message from APS, I mean, it was just, no, enough teachers didn't accept something to the effect of enough teachers didn't accept our financial incentive, so we can't offer summer school. I mean, really? That's not right. to blame a failure to staff summer school on the teachers.
Well, but I think one of the problems is sort of granularity. I mean, obviously, parents have an incentive to be very involved in their school and in the sub-program of their school. That's why we have school by school PTAs. And then there's, of course, the overall council of PTAs. I guess where I sort of get a little frustrated and confused is how we go from the granularity of the PTA and the monthly PTA meeting agenda to the ACDC level or the annual ballot box once a year at the ballot box. There seems to be quite a bit of disconnect between the two. And even if you listen very carefully to the school board campaigns in Arlington or in any other jurisdiction, the issues don't have the granularity that perhaps a parent would expect. And that's just by the nature of the fact that someone's running for a county-wide office versus running for PTA president or something, or principal. So how do you address that problem?
Well, let me speak first just based on the PTA that I'm involved in, which is for Drew, which is 61% low income as a school, which I mentioned, just to sort of make the point that PTA participation and the number of volunteers and the things that you can do and the money that you can raise, it varies widely by school in Arlington. And one of the things that does sort of tie for me is you have involved granular PTAs who are able to do things like regular enrichment classes, reading buddies, room parents, things like that. And you have schools that don't have that. And both of those exist in Arlington, and they're both strong school models that do a great job educating kids, no matter which one you're on. But as somebody who is seeking elected office that is, I think, supposed to oversee the system, right, I do think it's important to consider equity issues in the context of school resourcing and PTAs and what the different experiences children have because of these disparities between our schools. And so to me, as Democrats, right, who are facilitating the caucus process and supporting candidates in primaries and then proceeding to help folks decide how to vote in the fall, you know, it's the bigger issues on how we deal with these differences in the nitty-gritty details that would be something that would be a campaign on, and really ought to be, I think, a focus of how we tie our local schools governance to our values as Democrats and what we think is going to be the best for the public school system as a whole. How do we get all of these kids to the level where they ought to be so that, you know, each school is meeting its definition of success, right? That's something that a school board member, I think, should have some responsibility for and ought to be able to articulate, like, what are the issues and what can we do as a school system, even when individual PTAs are also doing their thing.
Right.
I don't know if that's totally responsive.
But I think that's an interesting point, because I think that in a tremendously involved PTA cannot compensate. Barrett and Barcroft schools, which are the schools that I'm the most in contact with, partly because my yard borders on Barcroft, I can't help it. But their PTAs mounted humongous attempts while the schools were closed. Unbelievable. They roped in North Arlington schools to help them. They sent home reading materials, study materials, supplies for kids who might not have pencils, pens, and papers. They got them phones and laptops. They did everything that I think a PTA, they gave them food every week, food, lunch bags. It was a huge operation. And yet the kids fell further behind than their counterparts in North Arlington in the wealthier schools.
And Drew didn't have any of that. Just we had a church running a food distribution every other week that PTA volunteered at, and no school supplies, no, you know.
What happened in Barcroft and Barrett were like models that people wrote about in the national press.
Yeah.
And it didn't do the trick, which is my I guess my bigger point. Is
and
that
Callie, and I get that Please.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I didn't mean to cut you off there. Finish your thought.
It can't compensate. It just can't.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you exactly why it doesn't do it.
No, I think that's exactly right. I think that gets to what I see is like, we have to have a systemic response. My daughter is at Claremont as well too. Likewise, we still have a food bank that we're still operating that started during the pandemic. We do the coat drives, we do all of the things. But what we're sort of seeing is, and like, we're seeing like, principals at some schools are standing up after school tutoring programs, right? But that's not happening at other schools that need it. We're not, so we really need to, so, and you're exactly right. Like those monumental efforts by the PTA are not enough and we have to really have an APS systemic response and we've seen these plans that other districts have come out with that are really comprehensive and thorough and get at all of the issues, not just the academic, but the trauma for those who have lost parents or the social emotional, issues that kids might be facing after so long away from their peers. And we have like maybe a 2-page PDF. My child, like Brian's, she's behind, right? And when her beginning of the year assessments, they came home and they said, like she's significantly behind. Her DIBELS scores are terrible, because she's dyslexic, and these are the years that are crucial for early intervention, and we've missed that window, right? We're missing that window. And the response has been, okay, well, yes, she's significantly behind, but what we're going to do is we're going to give her more time on her iPad for that. And that's literally the note that comes home. Your child might get small group. Your child will get more Lexia, Dreambox, and small group instruction. And there should be a big asterisk by small group instruction, because that's assuming that teachers can pick up more small group instruction, and they really probably can't, because we need to really be devoting more resources to this. We need to be bringing in more people. We need to be developing those after-school tutoring programs, not just at the 1 or 2 schools where a principal has undertaken that, but really as a systemic effort. So I hear what you are saying, and I echo that, and I apologize for jumping in on you.
Yeah, and I just want to rope this in on a political angle, is that these frustrations in the community, the lack of voting, the lack of engagement by our electeds, result in people going and voting for somebody who they completely disagree with on every other issue, but they're single issue voters, like what Victoria said. And if you drove down Langston Boulevard, Lee Highway right before the election, there was tons of Parents for Youngkin signs. They were specifically targeting parents because they knew of these frustrations. So, the Republicans are honing in on it, and they are really defining the issues.
Okay, Herschel, do you have a final question for the group?
Well, it's a comment. I know you record these, and I'm going to recommend to a number of people that they watch the recording. I think it's kind of the best discussion of the issue that I've seen, and that maybe on your website you might want to refer to this discussion too, and to the slides separately. Although I think the discussion with the slides is better if people are willing to put the time in. And I guess my final comment, though, is that which is peripheral in a way, is that I think the issue of our time is whether or not we're going to have democracy in this country in 2025. And it would be a shame if single issue voters on whether it's education or something else, we're not voting for democracy because the education of their kids seemed more important at the time. Because I have to say, I think the education of your kids, if we don't have a democracy, are going to be even greater than they were during the pandemic. So those, anyway, wants to comment on my comments, you're welcome.
I think we're all in agreement. It would be far and away the ideal to not put voters to that choice.
Right. Well, Katie, you want to just spend 1 minute summarizing and remind people of your website and so on, because I do think we've come to the end of our 90 minutes.
Yes. Well, thank you again. Our website is arlingtonparentsforeducation.org, and you can scroll down and there is a spot to submit your email address to get our newsletter. You know, the website, you know, as someone mentioned earlier, it was primarily, we were formed to really look at the reopening issues with the pandemic, but it's really become much more than that now. So I do encourage everyone to look at it and follow us on Twitter if that's your thing. I don't know if that's for this crowd, but we are there as well. And thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming. We deeply appreciate your participation today. I will post the link of this YouTube video on the Arlington Democrat Facebook discussion, and also on our email list. And I'll also send it to Katie if she wants to share it with her group. She's certainly free to do that. And again, we really do appreciate you taking the time to meet with us. It was very important, and I think we all learned a lot. Thank you so much. And I just also want to remind the crew that the deadline for filing resolutions with the 8th District Resolutions Committee is the 18th. And if you have any education resolutions, we'd love to read those. The deadline for filing as a delegate to the 8th District Convention is the 25th. And I hope all of our senior Democrats seriously consider becoming candidates to the convention. And with that, we'll adjourn until next month. Thank you very much.
Thank you.